Great. Well, welcome, Chef friends, to our Chef Conf panel on using Chef to manage desktops. So today we have with us Johnny Ramos from Netflix, Mike Dodge from Facebook, and Andy from Insight. So can each of you just give a quick introduction and a few words about yourselves? Johnny, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Johnny Ramos. I am an employee for Netflix, a senior client systems engineer. A little bit about my background. I've been in the industry definitely a little over 10 years working with clients, and I've been a part of essentially most of the FANG companies implementing and working with endpoints.
Great. Andy, how about you go next?
Hi, everyone. Andy Deltuvia. Been in the industry for much longer than anyone else on the panel. But I came from fundamental research with Bell Labs all the way through running various VARs, integrators, and working for corporate enterprise Fortune 15 companies.
Great. And last but not least, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mike Dodge. I've been at Facebook for basically over a decade, working on the client space the entire time. I founded the client platform engineering team at Facebook, and I've used many different tools and many different approaches, but by far, so far, Chef has been the best.
Awesome, and that's great to hear. Thank you for that. So my name is Niamh Cahill. I run the solution architect team at Chef. So yeah, at Chef, we've been seeing a lot of interest in leveraging the Chef approach to manage desktops, and especially, with the last year and a half of COVID, that's become an increasingly important space for our customers and open source users to have to manage. So just in general, let's start with you, Andy. What industry trends are you seeing in the desktop management space, and have those been accelerated by COVID?
I think the need for desktop management has certainly been accelerated, and I think there's a realization if I look across some of the clients that I'm working with today. Obviously COVID had significant impact on the ability to manage a desktop and then the need to manage a desktop. So it was a compounding issue that if they were ignoring it or they did it haphazardly in the past, with the proliferation of people in and out, and then if you look across the globe, we've already had instances of people being remote and then coming back to the office and then returning to remote. So I think that there's an IT realization that desktop management is a top priority, because it was also compounded, I saw, by the logistics of COVID and people being forced to BYOD or BYO Connect, right? Many companies I worked with couldn't get devices to their people logistically. So they were using what they had at home, completely unmanaged, completely unvetted, completely unsecure. So those are some of the higher end issues or global issues that I saw impacting desk side management.
That's a great point. And actually, I think in the past or in previous jobs that I've had, my configuration management that I was using, you had to VPN in, and then all the changes were pushed at once, and then your laptop catches fire and you can fry eggs on it, and it's not a great experience, right? So
Correct. Or one of the things we're finding in some of the more remote locations, they didn't have the ability to do that, right? You just couldn't get it through the wire, right?
Yes, that's a great point.
Clients with people that live, what I would consider off the grid, being from New York City, and they're running satellite links to do their connectivity.
Yeah, that's a great point about bandwidth as well. That's not something that we I live in a very highly connected area as well. And that's not something that we always consider in more urban areas, for sure. So Johnny, what thoughts do you have on that in terms of just industry trends and, the supportability of the different scenarios that we're faced with now?
Yeah, to touch on Andy's point, it's how do we think about externalizing the tools that we were leveraging while people were in the office, and thinking about how we had to shift the way we did that and how to do that securely, and think about the different changes to the authentication methods that our clients now need to talk with our Chef endpoints to be able to deploy and secure these things. And to another point to which Andy mentioned, logistically, it definitely was difficult to be able to provide assets. And so users had to use their home computers, and without VPN or even the capabilities of, do these users understand how to install a VPN client in order to make that connection into to be able to connect to local resources. And so, that was a very difficult task to be able to make those changes immediately. And so I think in the interim, a lot of people were scrambling to try to figure it all out and just to get something out there and get people to actually work, yeah.
Yeah, I had one chef friend who was chatting to me, and they told me that essentially they were out of Chromebooks completely. Like, they couldn't order any. There were no stocks of essentially the standard laptops that they were providing to their end users. So that kind of opened my eyes, and they said they had provisioned, I think, 5,000 of them in the last 6 months, just a very large number, because they were on board. I think one of the things that we've seen on the chef side of COVID as well is there's a lot of new employees, there's a lot of people changing jobs, which was an unexpected trend that we've observed. Great, well, thank you for that. So Mike, just on the topic of security and enabling end users, have security requirements and the whole question and topic that Johnny just brought up around authorization and, securing endpoints, how has that created any challenges for you at Facebook? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I kind of actually want to touch on the industry question as well. One thing that we didn't bring up was it seems, at least in the client space, and MDM is becoming increasingly a requirement to do any sort of programmatic provisioning of devices. So if you look at Apple, you essentially can't start an automated provisioning process without an MDM anymore. Yep. Same thing with Microsoft. If you want to be able to kind of drop ship a laptop, you're going to need an MDM with autopilot and everything in order for you just to get Chef on disk. But for us, open source is pretty important. We are one of the main developers of micro MDM, and we are using that for our Mac fleet. We're rolling out Intune for our Windows fleet, and I think trying to avoid MDM is no longer really an option, whereas we were doing that for some time because we were happy with just how Chef worked and everything. To the thing of everything moving with off network, yeah, that was going to be really problematic. But luckily, we're already working on this, and we're nearly ready as work from home started. So within a few weeks, the stuff that was like beta, we rolled it out to the fleet, and before you know it, we were up and running, even over the internet. That in itself brings some security challenges. And then what you were saying is, in terms of like hiring new employees, managing the machine on the internet is fairly easy. Trying to instantiate trust and allowing someone to provision from anywhere added a lot more challenges and actually took a lot more work. And we had to rethink about like the security approach on how do you not just validate this is our machine and it is in a good state, but that the user is who they say they are, and how do you validate all that. So along with your like security questions, we've always treated our fleet to have a pretty high bar in terms of security. But recently we've been not just relying on Chef, but using Inspect as well to help us with our compliance requirements, but also give us a good sense of what our fleet is at any given moment.
Could you go into a little bit more of the details there, just around what that workflow or functional flow looks like? So MDM, for our audience who's not deeply familiar with this space, is mobile device management. It's essentially the first step typically in managing what I would consider the lower level aspects of a laptop or an endpoint. So, you open when I first joined Chef, I think one of the greatest experiences was I opened my brand new laptop from Apple, and I went out and it registered with Apple's DEP platform, bootstrapped itself and provisioned all the stuff that I needed, and actually looked after that flow. Now, I'm sure we're not as advanced in our authorization and security layers as you all are, but if you could give a high level overview of what those different considerations in that space and what that looks like, that would be super helpful, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, so like you said, Apple and Microsoft have a very similar approach. As soon as the OS is turned on for the first time, it looks at the serial number of the device, calls out to the vendor and says, who owns this device? If it is an enterprise device and it's registered to Facebook, they send it to our micro MDM service. Micro MDM will then throw down a payload. The initial payload that you get is fairly limited. So what we do is we install a thin streamed package that is based on an application released by Eric Gomez, who is currently at Uber. And what that does is kind of a meta package. You give it a config, and then it downloads all the other payloads you need. For us, that's basically just Chef, and then Chef installs everything else. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That was really just, I didn't want, we don't need to go into the exact details or steps of that, but it was just a general flow, because I know that some of the discussions we've had with the Chef community as well is around leveraging Inspect to validate that certain settings are present on a laptop prior to authorizing further stuff, for want of a better word, right? Whether that's authorizing into a different app or essentially enforcing a configuration on that laptop.
Yeah, so actually, real quick, I'll expand on that. So when Chef
Please.
completes, it has a report handler at the end, and it ships it up into our internal data tooling. You can't get a cert unless you are on a machine that is assigned to you and is checking in with Chef and everything's all good. And if your machine degrades over time or for any reason Chef is in a bad state, we flag that, and you're no longer allowed to access internal resources until Chef is in a good state.
Gotcha. Okay. Very interesting. That's a great approach. And that's actually a similar approach to one that we've been using actually on internal resources with other customers as well, which is, that report handler run at the end and leveraging that Chef information and status in different ways. So I always think of it in terms of inputs and outputs, right? So our inputs are the configuration and what we want to have deployed. And then the outputs are, was this successful? What's going on with this particular node, et cetera, et cetera. So Andy, just on that topic of security and managing endpoints and laptops, what are the challenges that you've been seeing in that space as we all work from home and coffee shops and Malibu and Maui and wherever we might be if we're fortunate?
Well, I think you brought up one aspect of security and MDM as a whole. And I call it the new user experience, right? When you opened up your brand new laptop and everything works, that's almost a gift from the organization that you're joining, right? I see so many organizations struggle with that. And with the marketplace today, and the refocus on the employee, which got away from us maybe 8 years ago, I think there's an attribute there that you can't really put. It's a soft item that is invaluable to the end user, right? I come on, you load my machine, and I open it up, and everything actually works, right? And on the back end, the IT team knows that you're there, that your device is healthy, and that you have access to what you need to, right? I do a lot of work in zero trust networking today, and anyone can implement zero trust, right? You just don't trust anyone, they can't do anything, right? What there's a realization as you go to true MDM and the need for MDM. Let's face it, with I believe I saw something published just recently. The average ransomware payout right now is at 170,000, right? Ransomware attacks are up 150% over the last 12 months, right? It's no secret that it's out there, right? And then, when I start to see things as ransomware as a service being offered out in the dark places of the internet, it really is a concern that you need to manage that device, you need to secure it. And then there's that fine line between, secured and productivity, right? And the tools that you implement to allow the end user flexibility, along with passing the test of IT and IT management and your security management systems, is not an easy task to pull together. And people were forced to do that in an accelerated format, right? Much to having to do logistics and everything else, it all compounded. But I think right now it's kind of settling, and that people have an understanding and a new appreciation for the new normal as it pertains to device deployment and device, you are anywhere, right? Is kind of the mentality. I see people struggle with it. I see them use multiple tools. I see them do very old school logistics to get it there, which is not beneficial to the end user or the organization. Anything to expedite that process is a blessing.
I agree. And I like what you said about zero trust, because it's so true. Locking everything down, relatively straightforward. Enabling people to do their jobs is a whole other challenge, right?
Right.
So Johnny, just in terms of managing laptops and desktops in this way, how does that allow you to better support your end users at Netflix? How does that improve their experience? What are your thoughts around that area?
Yeah, and that's a great. You touched on it already. It's about the experience, and a lot of the industry has started off endpoint management as more of a security function. But it's now, as Andy touched on, it's now evolved into more of the user experience, because users are now working remotely and permanently. And so our user experience is a big deal. And here at Netflix, it is our number one goal. Of course, security is definitely an aspect of that, but we want to make sure that as users receive their laptops at home, at their office, wherever they might be, and in whichever location, we want to make sure that they can have that experience. One of the unique challenges in that space right now is Linux. Mike touched on having the macOS space, leveraging DEP, and Microsoft having the autopilot features. One of the challenges there, as I mentioned, is how do we do Linux? How do we manage Linux? How do we provide that same experience we're leveraging in the other operating systems with Linux? And so that's still a challenge that we're trying to figure out. But holistically, it's all about the experience, and trying to make sure that our corporate users have what they need. And then being at Netflix, as we create content. And so how do we provide different configurations for different productions and different sets to be able for them to be able to jump in and create that best content for our viewers?
Yeah, which I, for one, enjoy every day, for what it's worth. Probably a little bit too much, but that's a great point. And can you speak a little bit more about, you touched on it there, around providing different configurations to different teams and enabling them? How does the DevOps approach, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, testing, the ability to functionally test configurations, to run compliance checks, to align the versions of what's being deployed to that particular end user's requirements or that particular team's needs, is how helpful is Chef in terms of enabling that experience?
Yeah, I started off with mentioning our nerds team. I believe they're called EdTech team now, but we rely heavily on our support teams to be able to let us know which individual production requires what sort of application. And then from then we leverage the tools such as Chef and other application managers to be able to say, okay, we can identify that this production requires this specific applications and to these versions. It's very, very particular, or it's required heavily to be on a certain version throughout a production. And in order to ensure that, in order for it to not potentially update itself, we need to use a tool such as Chef to ensure that that specific version of that application is applied to that production. And again, it's always working cohesively with our support teams to ensure that that production gets what they need and to what version, and to be able to control that asset.
That's really interesting, actually. I have friends who are producers, and I didn't think about it in terms of individual production teams as well. So that's very cool. So let me ask a more specific technical question, just around the MDM layer and integration with Chef. And one of the questions I often get is, well, best practice really is to use an MDM layer. So Microsoft Intune, VMware Workspace ONE, there's a number of different approaches, micro MDM. So there's essentially fulfilling the same functional requirement, which is managing the actual underlying laptop itself. Where does the MDM capability leave off, and where does Chef take over? And what I know that, each approach has its strengths, right? But how does that fit together? What is the delineation that you see, and why, we talked a little bit about why you'd use Chef on top of an MDM solution, but how does that fit together? I don't know who wants to take that. Okay, Mike, go first.
So for us, like I said, MDM is seen for us as a way to get Chef on the device for the most part. There is in the Apple space, there is some functionality now that you can only manage if you're DAP enrolled and using an MDM. For that, we have to use the MDM, right? But there's ways to get creative with it. So in most configuration managements outside of Chef and the standard ones, you set a setting for your fleet, right? So screensaver is 10 minutes for everyone. But if you wanted it to be different for individuals or a group of people, you would have to create and manage all these groups, create separate policies for each one, and the administrative cost explodes. But with Chef, we've done stuff where everything's an API, including the profiles in MDM. So if an end user decided they wanted to change something that we manage for a set of users or for them individually, they put in a Chef diff. The next time Chef runs, it actually reaches out to the micro MDM API and then assigns that value for that individual machine. So although we're using MDM, Chef is actually the one driving all the logic behind it.
That's great. That's an awesome answer. So, that I think one of the powers of using Chef is that approach where you have versioning, you also have visibility into what those settings are for the various teams. So Johnny, I mean, are you using a somewhat similar approach, or do you have any thoughts around that topic as well?
Yeah, Netflix is pretty new to endpoint management at the moment, so it is exactly the approach that we're trying to take here, is leveraging Chef to make those decisions based on data. And be able to integrate with the MDM solutions. And the MDMs have been really open now, or have been adding API functionality, I should say, to be able to have a tool like Chef talk with the API and let them know, hey, this certain production requires this certain version, or this producer or this executive producer on this show potentially requires an additional thing. And so it's allowing Chef to leverage the data to be able to make the right call on the machine. And not just that, Mike touched on, you know, allowing the user themselves to be able to say, hey, I would love to have this certain thing, and the whole backend mechanisms be automated to be able to produce the output.
That's great.
And then just to touch on one more thing about that, and then it's persistent, right? So if a user takes the time to configure their machine and they lose that machine, the next time they get the new machine, all their configs come back because of Chef.
Yes, and that's something that I've noticed about, especially the library of cookbooks that you all are using. That's a really cool feature, I have to say. And it's really, you know, going back to that end user enablement, right? So allowing them to configure and set certain settings that you want to enable them to configure, right?
And this is in particularly important for client devices and in environments like mine and Johnny's. We have very smart engineers, and if they don't want you to manage their machine, you know, they have physical access and unlimited amounts of time. With other tools I was using that wasn't quite as transparent, the users were like decompiling binaries, getting API keys, turning stuff off. They were rebelling, and it was adversarial. And I realized I was never going to win that battle. So by moving to Chef and putting all of my Chef code right along our production code, it gives even my most critical users the ability to look at what's going on in their machine and potentially either contribute, add, or override individual settings for themselves if they disagree with it, instead of disabling all of my tooling altogether. So this allows us to both extend like an olive branch to some of the people that don't want to be managed, but at the same time know that they're doing it in a secure way, because every change they make has to be approved by another engineer. And because it's in source control, our security team can come by and audit whatever's in there to understand if things are the way they should be.
Yeah, and just on that topic of source control, it sounds so simple, right? But at the end of the day, the configurations that you're deploying are there, they're visible to everybody. You know, on a related but slightly different topic around group policy within Windows, I had someone ask me once, you know, well, why would I use this approach instead of something like group policy? I'm like, do you know what group policy is configuring? Because I don't. And only the people who are the administrator role within Active Directory have visibility into that. And even then, it can be a little bit difficult to understand what exactly has been deployed. So I really like that, you know, committing everything to version control gives everybody that ability to view what's being deployed, which is great.
Well, but it also makes our jobs as administrators much easier, right? Because I'm no longer managing individual machines. I'm managing a platform. And I've decentralized my management to the people who know the best about a given thing. So as most people know, we've open sourced a bunch of stuff. Like one of the things that we open source is OS Query. We have the developers of OS Query. Why am I deploying it? Like, they clearly have a better understanding of how this product should be deployed. So I gave them, delegated them to manage OS Query on my fleet now. But like the security teams, they're not coming to me with requests. They're coming to me with diffs that I have to approve. It just has really changed the dynamic between what my team is responsible for. And it allowed me to decentralize some of the responsibilities and help my team scale, because without that, I don't know if we would have been able to.
It really sounds like it's, sorry, go ahead, John.
I like to think of ourselves as endpoint management as a service.
Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. I nearly think of it as well as it's the promise of DevOps realized, right? Because when we first started with DevOps, it was really, you know, there's a slide that I have that's about everybody clutching on to different parts of the elephant. And that's really what it feels like sometimes. Like, how do you even start with this? And yeah, it's really about just getting the different teams collaborating in a very positive way. You know, that's what, and enabling people, as you mentioned. So Johnny, let me ask you this. In terms of use cases and deployment patterns, just in general, it doesn't even have to be Chef specific, but if somebody's getting out the door with this kind of approach, you know, what would your recommendations be? What kind of patterns have you all seen that enable folks to be successful? And think about it as, you know, conversations that you can have at different teams, tooling, architecture, whatever you might think is relevant.
So providing advice for a new person potentially, or building solutions as we have done, is what I'm taking out of that question. And so I would say, first and foremost, an MDM solution. A lot of folks still have the monolithic imaging perspective within the mindset. I think Andy touched on that the industry is changing. The technical, there's a lot of new technical solutions out there to be able to expand on what you're trying to do. First and foremost, I guess I should say, is what is your end goal? What is your end result? What kind of experience do you want to provide your users? And so from then on, definitely look at what the endpoint requires. And first and foremost, of course, it's an MDM. And then from there, if I wasn't thinking about Chef being in the picture, is what is an MDM, or could the MDM, I should say, provide everything that is needed within your company? If it requires multiple types of different configurations, to which might be too much of an overhead for the administrator, as Mike mentioned, then look into a configuration manager such as Chef. And it will essentially help not only build the company and provide that better experience, but it also would help you as an individual become more of a DevOps engineer / software engineer, because now you're dabbling in the code space. You're learning how to manipulate code to be able to satisfy the requirements and what you're trying to apply at the company. And then from then on, you're not only building the company in this space, but you're also building your own personal career to be able to head towards where you want to potentially be. You might change that mindset you might have had in the beginning of being an administrator to now being an actual engineer working in the code space.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's a good point. It's about developing skills that are portable and extensible, for want of a better word. So Mike, what are your thoughts around that topic?
Yeah, I went through this, right? I was using a different tool because way back when I trade. So we have a concept of like code wins arguments. What I would say is start using Chef. So I knew nothing about it. I started looking at talks and the documentation and playing around with it. And I did a bake-off. I gave myself a challenge on my old tool and a challenge with Chef, and I realized, wow, not only can I do this, it gives me a lot more flexibility. It allows me to express, my goals of what the end state of the machine should be in code and be more visible, opposed to like your GPO analogy was perfect. Instead of doing it off on my own. Now, culturally, it's also really important to us that everything's in source control and everything is peer reviewed and then auditable and all that. So it made Chef an easy win for me. But just start using it, slowly start migrating some of your old stuff into the new thing. There's a wealth of knowledge, a great community to answer these questions. There'll be a ton of different opinions, but like if you really want to get started, just start, because that's like the hardest part, right? Many teams might not be set up for this, so you kind of need to think about not just how you get this in your environment, but how you bring the rest of your team along. Make sure that you're considering the rest of the environment too, and what their needs are, and whether or not this will be well suited for your environment. Because if you only have 100 machines, I don't know if it warrants it. But even if you have 100 machines, let's say it's just you, and this is how you choose to manage those, I think in many ways this could be a better overall solution for your company and your environment, and you personally, because of career growth and everything like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And, I have a phrase that I've started using, which is start where you're at, right? Maybe you're advanced, maybe you're not. I mean, but, if you just start small and iterate and build upon, we like to take the approach of like deciding what your baseline config would be whether it's on servers or desktop, right? And then just iterating from there and incrementally adding capabilities, I think is definitely a good approach. So Andy, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Do you have thoughts around getting out the door with laptop and endpoint management, success stories that you've observed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that were touched on there. And if you look at the evolution of IT as a whole, right, automation ultimately enters everywhere, right? I've seen it in the network space where, to what Johnny had mentioned about, and also Mike touched on, network engineers of the past are now writing code, right? I mean, that's what they do. They write code. They write very, complicated code to do various things, right? And I see that same transition coming into the end user space. And Chef is a driver of that. There's no doubt about it, because it's a tool that you can leverage to do all these things. And I think too that, it's always been my mantra, end user first, right? That's where you start your DevOps, right? What does the end user want? What can I give them? How can I keep them happy, right? Happy end user, right? Branson might say this too. Happy employee, happy company, right? And it all starts from, their fingertips, I call it, right? Anything they touch with their fingertips, if you can make that experience pain-free so that they can do whatever their job function is, and automate as much possible and keep people in check, as Mike and Johnny live every day, right? Because they never know who's going to knock on their door and say, hey, we need to know what this division is doing with this certain application, and where did it go, and how is it configured, and next thing you know, the G-men from security show up and say, what are you guys doing? And you can go, here's everything we did. Oh, and by the way, it was checked and it's documented with timestamps and dates and more data than you can go through. So I'll send you over, the petabyte of file, and you can have your way with it, right? What it allows them to, it allows administrators to do their job, allows you to increase your end user satisfaction, and then comply on the back end with the IT gods.
Great.
And if you start there, happy end user, happy company.
Very true. Very true. So that's really it for our session today. So I just wanted to go around and ask each of you, are there any key takeaways you'd like to share with our audience, or parting points? Johnny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I would say that there are administrators and engineers that are afraid to jump into this space and leverage a tool like Chef. But what I would suggest is to dive in with the community, talk with other engineers. One of the things that allowed me to essentially accept the way of DevOps is to talk with other engineers, and everyone was really open and wanted to talk to you, rather than folks that were kind of like, just, hey, I'm a know-all be-all, don't talk to me, you're below my level, right? That there was nothing of that with the community. And I would say, have conversations with the community. We're all open, tap our shoulders, however that is remotely nowadays, but speak with us. Feel free to message any of us, and we're open to have that chat and be able to talk with you about your environment potentially, and provide you with some guidance.
Thank you. Mike, do you want to go next?
Yeah, reach out to the community would be my first one if you're going to get started. Chef is a very powerful tool, and I am convinced that you'll get more out of Chef than probably your existing tool, but you just got to get started. There's plenty of good communities. There's the Chef Slack. One I'd like to call out too is if you go to macadmins.org. It's another Slack channel. I know it says Mac admins, but it's actually just client platform people all chatting about all the things. Check out the open source community. for so long I was working on everything by myself. And then when I finally picked up my head to like see what was out there, I realized so much that I had done was reinventing what other people had already done. So you don't need to do that. There's so much out there. Just start with anything that everyone else built and build on top of that. Join the community, because it's just going to really accelerate your growth and your abilities within your space.
And just to add a personal viewpoint on that, I wholeheartedly agree about the community. I was a network engineer by trade for like 15 years before I really stepped into the DevOps space. And initially I was a bit self-conscious, I have to admit, around infrastructure as code and paired programming, but everybody was just so helpful and collaborative. Really, there was no judgment. I started, I iterated, I just did the best I could every day, and here I am. So I've really enjoyed that journey, and yeah, everybody's been really great. And find us on the Chef Community Slack. There's Mac admins. I'm sure there are Discord servers out there too. But you can find me on Chef Community Slack. So if anybody has any follow-up questions or they want to ping me on there, you can feel free to, I have that open as a workspace within Slack all the time. So you can just DM me there as well. So, and Andy, any key takeaway points, wrap up, etc.?
Well, I think there was a lot of great input from Johnny and Mike. I think that they're in the throes of this every day, and I think any great trip you take starts with the first step. Pretty simple, right? To their point, you gotta take the first step. Don't be misguided by larger organizations that say there's a way to do everything, right? There's a whole community of open source people out there that I've leveraged through my career. I'm not much of, I'm more of a hack, so I rely on those people to help me, right? What did I do wrong?
Yeah, I was gonna say, everybody thinks they're a hack, that's right.
So anyway, got to take the first step and try it. I'm sure you can get a demo. I'm sure you can try it and enjoy it. Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Well, I just want to say a very hearty chef thank you to all of you for participating today. It's been a great conversation. I am going to stop the recording now.